The semester had ended, and the 9 students were so excited to go home for Christmas. They hired a small bus, their laughter filling the air. The seats were worn but comfortable, and the bus rattled slightly as it moved. They talked about what they would eat, the gifts they'd give, and the joy of seeing their families again. The road stretched out before them, smooth and long, like a ribbon under the golden sun. Trees lined the sides, the leaves swaying gently, as if waving the students goodbye. Occasionally, a bird swooped down and disappeared into the branches, adding to the idyllic scene. Everything felt perfect. It was the kind of day that made you feel like nothing could go wrong. Then suddenly, the bus slowed down. The driver, an old man with a face like dried yam, squinted ahead. A worn, frayed cap sat atop his head, and his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "What's that?" he muttered, pointing. By the side of the road stood an old woman. Her gray wrapper hung loosely around her thin frame, and her hands waved desperately in the air. A small bag, tattered and dusty, lay at her feet. Beside her was a broken-down van, its tire flat and useless. "Help me! Please help me!" she shouted, her voice cracking like dry wood. The students leaned out of the windows, their hearts softening. The wind blew gently into the bus, carrying the scent of distant flowers and dry earth. "Driver, stop now," said Bola, the gentle one. "She needs help." The driver shook his head. "This road is dangerous," he said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Let's keep going." But the students wouldn't hear it. "Ah, Uncle Driver, how can you say that?" asked Teo, her eyes wide. "Can't you see she's an old woman? What if she's someone's grandmother?" The others agreed, nodding and pleading with the driver to stop. Reluctantly, the driver sighed and pulled over, muttering under his breath. The students stepped out of the bus, their faces bright with kindness. Dust kicked up from the ground as they walked toward her. "Mama, don't worry," said Ikenna, trying to comfort the woman. "We'll help you." The old woman's face lit up like a candle in the dark. Her hands, bony and trembling, reached toward Ikenna as if in gratitude. "Thank you, my children," she said, her voice trembling. But behind her smile was something strange, something hidden like a snake in tall grass. Her eyes flicked toward the trees, just for a moment. And just like that, the students walked straight into a trap. But before anyone could take another step, the old woman let out a loud, piercing whistle. It cut through the air like a blade, sending chills down their spines. From the bushes, men armed with guns burst out like a pack of wolves. Their faces were hidden with masks, and their voices boomed. "Everybody down now." The students froze, their hearts pounding like talking drums, their hearts pounding like talking drums. "What is this?" Lonzo whispered, his voice shaking. "Lie down," one of the men barked, waving his gun. "Do as I say, or I'll shoot." The students dropped to the ground, trembling like leaves caught in a storm. The men moved quickly, tying their hands behind their backs with rough ropes. Blindfolds were tied tightly around their eyes, plunging them into darkness. "Please, don't hurt us," Adiz begged, her voice breaking like glass. The kidnappers ignored their cries. "Move!" they shouted, pushing the students toward the bush. As they stumbled into the thick forest, the sound of the bus engine starting again echoed faintly in the distance. The old woman, whom the kidnappers had used as bait, was gone, and so was their freedom. The kidnappers pushed the students deeper into the forest, their rough hands shoving them forward. The forest was dark and the path was uneven, filled with roots that grabbed at their feet like hidden hands. The air grew heavy with the earthy smell of damp leaves and soil. The students stumbled and fell, their knees scraping against the ground. "Keep moving," one of the men barked, his voice sharp like a whip. The blindfolds made it worse. The students couldn't see where they were going. They could only hear the hooting of owls, the chirping of crickets, and the rustling of leaves that sounded like whispers. Occasionally, something scurried in the undergrowth, making them flinch. Each sound made their hearts race. It felt like the forest itself was alive and watching them. A daisy tripped over a root and fell hard. Her breathing was ragged. "Please, I can't walk anymore," she cried, her voice trembling. But one of the men yanked her up roughly. "Move, or I'll leave you here for the wild animals," he growled. "Or I'll leave you here for the wild animals," he growled, hot against her ear. Finally, they reached a clearing. The kidnappers shoved the students to the ground. The ropes around their hands and the blindfolds were removed, and for the first time, the students could see their captors clearly. The clearing was surrounded by trees, their tall trunks looming like silent sentinels. There were 5 men, each one looking more dangerous than the next. "Now listen," one of the men shouted, his voice echoing through the night. "Call your parents. Tell them to bring money if they want you back alive." The students exchanged terrified glances. Their hands shook as they reached for their phones. One by one, they called their parents, their voices filled with fear. "Mama, they've kidnapped me," Ikenna said, his voice cracking. "Please send money. They said they'll kill me." And then one by one, the others followed, calling their parents and pleading with them to cooperate with the kidnappers. After every call, one of the armed men would forcefully take their phone, then tell their parents, "If you really want to see your child back alive, you should drop the money before sunset tomorrow." And then, with that, he'd hang up the phone and move on to the next. 2 of the students, Nonso and Amara, were lucky. Their parents were wealthy and agreed to pay the ransom quickly. The kidnappers untied them the following morning after receiving the payments and then let them go, shoving them back toward the road. But for the others, hope began to slip away. Adie sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was a poor widow, and the days knew there was no money to send. The kidnappers looked at the remaining students and sneered. "The rest of you better pray," one said coldly, "because if your families don't pay, you won't see tomorrow." The forest grew darker, and the night seemed heavier, like a thick blanket of fear pressing down on them. The fire crackled nearby, sending thin trails of smoke curling into the air. The students huddled together, their hearts sinking like stones in water. The days passed slowly, like the ticking of a broken clock. For the students who remained, fear wrapped around them like a cold, heavy chain. The kidnappers' voices grew louder, their faces darker. Each time they shouted, it felt like thunder in the students' hearts. The fire crackled low, sending faint sparks into the air. But it did little to warm the cold, heavy dread that surrounded them. "You think we're playing with you," one of the men shouted. His eyes burned like fire as he grabbed the student, dragging him away. His heavy boots crunched against the forest floor, the sound chillingly loud in the silence. "No, please, no, please, no, no." The boy screamed, But his cries were swallowed by the forest. Minutes later, a single gunshot rang out. The sound tore through the air like a blade, and silence followed. The boy had been shot dead since his family hadn't been able to raise any money. The remaining students huddled together, shaking and crying. Their breaths came in short, trembling gasps, and tears streamed down their faces. "Why are they doing this?" Teo whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. She clung to Adaise's arm for comfort, though it did little to steady her. "To scare us," Ikenna replied, his voice barely audible. "To scare our families into paying." His face was pale, streaked with dirt and sweat, but fear wasn't enough to stop the kidnappers. Each day they took another student, and each day another gunshot echoed in the forest, taking the lives of the innocent students, one per day. The students cried, begged, and pleaded, but the men had no mercy. The kidnappers sat around their fire, counting ransom payments on crumpled sheets of paper, their laughter like jagged glass in the heavy night air. Adais sat quietly in the corner, her face stricken with tears. She thought of her mother, a widow who had nothing to give. The ache of helplessness filled her chest like a stone. "Mama," Adais whispered to herself, her voice breaking. "How will you save me?" Far away, in a small, humble house, Adaise's mother knelt by her bed. Her knees were sore and her eyes red from crying, but she refused to stop. The flickering flame of a small kerosene lamp cast shadows on the walls, dancing like spirits. "God, hear me," she prayed, her voice shaking but strong. "Bring my daughter back to me. Don't let them hurt her." Each night, Adais's mother wept and prayed, her words rising to the heavens like smoke from a burning fire. Outside, the crickets sang their mournful song, as if echoing her grief. But back in the forest, Adais's hope began to fade. The kidnappers' anger grew like a storm, and the students wondered if they would live to see another day. The forest grew quieter with each passing night, as if even the animals were afraid to move. A low mist crept along the forest floor, snaking around the trunks of trees, adding to the eerie stillness. The students knew one thing: time was running out. The seventh night came, and the forest was silent, heavy with an uneasy calm. The students huddled together, their breaths shallow and their bodies shivering in the cold air. The kidnappers sat by their fire, their faces shadowed by the flickering flames. Occasionally, the wind whistled through the trees, breaking the quiet like a ghostly sigh. But something was different tonight. The men were restless, their voices sharp like broken glass. "I want more money," one of the men shouted suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. He stood up, his fists clenched. His shadow loomed large against the tree trunks, distorted and monstrous. "I did the hardest work. I deserve more." The others turned to him, their eyes narrowing like hawks. "You, what work did you do?" Another snapped. His voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "We all walked together. You not get more than the rest of us." The first man stepped closer, his voice rising like thunder. "Don't lie. I planned everything. Without me, you'd have nothing." The argument grew louder and louder, the words cutting through the night like sharp knives. The students flinched at every shout, terrified of being noticed. "You're greedy," one shouted. "You think you're better than us?" another growled. Then, like a storm breaking loose, they started pushing and shoving each other. Fists flew and curses filled the air. Their guns fell to the ground, forgotten in their rage. From the corner, the students watched with wide eyes, their hearts pounding. Ikenna leaned close to Adaeze and whispered, "What's happening?" Adaeze's eyes never left the men, her mind racing. "They are fighting over the money," she said softly. Then, like a spark lighting dry wood, an idea formed in her head. "This is our chance," Adaeze whispered, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "We have to escape now." The other students looked at her, their fear melting into determination. The kidnappers were too busy fighting to notice them. The time to act had come. The kidnappers' fight raged on. The kidnappers' fight raged on, their shouts filling the forest like a storm. Fists flew and curses spilled into the air. Their guns lay forgotten on the ground, and their rage blinded them to everything else. Adaeze whispered urgently, "Now, untie your ropes." Her fingers moved fast, loosening the knots around her wrists. Her nails dug into the rough fibers, but she ignored the sting. The others followed, their hands trembling as they worked quickly to free themselves. "Go, go!" Ikenna urged, his voice low but firm. Barefoot and desperate, the four students rose and ran into the forest. The darkness swallowed them, branches tearing at their clothes and scratching their skin. The forest felt alive, its trees stretching out like claws to grab them. The air was thick and heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Don't look back," Adaeze gasped, her breath heavy. "Just run!" But the sound of the escape reached the kidnappers. One of the men stopped fighting and turned sharply. "They're running," he shouted. The kidnappers grabbed their guns and bolted after them. The students ran faster, their hearts pounding like drums, but the kidnappers were closing in. Every twig that snapped beneath their feet sounded like thunder, betraying their position. Suddenly, a loud shot cracked through the night, freezing them in their tracks. The kidnappers had caught up. Before anyone could react, Tayo screamed as one of the men grabbed her. "Run!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Save yourselves! No! We can't leave you!" Adaeze shouted, tears streaming down her face. Her voice echoed painfully in the dark, but the other kidnappers were closing in, and Ikenna pulled Adaeze forward. "We have to go," he said, his voice trembling, though his grip on her arm was firm. As they ran, another shot rang out, louder than the first. Tayo's scream stopped. The sound of her voice, once so full of life, was gone. Adaeze's tears blurred her vision, but she kept running. Her legs felt like they would give out. But she pushed forward, her heart heavy with grief and fear. Finally, after what felt like forever, they saw a flicker of light in the distance. It was a village, its warm glow piercing the cold darkness of the forest. The three of them stumbled into the village, their bodies weak and trembling. "Help us!" Adaeze cried, her voice cracking. "Please help us!" Villagers came rushing out, their lanterns lighting up the students' faces, pale with fear and exhaustion. An old man stepped forward. "What happened, my children?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "We were kidnapped," Ikenna said, his voice shaking. They killed Tayo. They're still in the forest." The villagers didn't waste a moment. Some wrapped the students in blankets and gave them water, while others ran to alert the police. Adaeze sat on the ground, her tears falling silently. Tayo was gone, and the weight of that loss hung heavy in the air. But for the three who made it out, the nightmare was finally over. The village had given them safety, and now justice was on its way. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the village in soft gold. The air was filled with the sound of birds chirping, but Adaze, Ikena, and Kalu were too tired to notice. They had barely slept, their minds replaying the horrors of the night before. The villagers had alerted the police, and by dawn, officers arrived in their vans, armed and ready. "Show us where they are," one officer said. Ikena, his hand shaking, pointed toward the forest. The police moved swiftly, their steps firm and determined. The kidnappers, still in the forest, were caught before they could escape. Their shouts and curses echoed through the village. As the officers dragged them away, their weapons confiscated. "Justice will be served," the chief officer said, his voice steady. The students, though still shaken, felt a small weight lift from their hearts. By noon, Adaze, Ikena, and Kelu were escorted back home. Adaze sat quietly in the police van, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. As the vehicle rolled into her neighborhood, she saw her mother standing outside, her eyes red from sleepless nights of crying and praying. The moment Adaze stepped out, her mother ran to her, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "Adaze, my child," she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. Tears streamed down her face as she kissed Adaze's forehead. "God heard my prayers. You're alive. You're safe." Adaze clung to her mother, her own tears falling freely. "Mama, I thought I would never see you again," she whispered, her voice breaking. Later, as they sat together in their small home, Adaze shared everything that had happened. Her mother listened, holding her hand tightly, her heart breaking for the daughter she almost lost. Ikena and Kalu also returned to their families, welcomed with hugs and tears. The pain of losing Teo weighed heavily on them, but they promised to honor her memory by being more cautious in the future. As the days passed, the students reflected on the ordeal. Adaze spoke softly to her mother one evening, her eyes thoughtful. "Mama, not everyone who looks helpless can be trusted. We thought we were helping that old woman, but it was all a lie. She was a trap." Her mother nodded, her hand resting gently on Adaze's shoulder. "Kindness is good, my child, but it must be mixed with wisdom. Never forget that." And so, life slowly returned to normal. The forest, the kidnappers, and the terror became part of a story the students would never forget. But they also learned something powerful: to trust their instincts, to stay cautious, and to never take safety for granted. For Adaze and her friends, home was no longer just a place. It was a reminder of survival, love, and second chances. Thank you for watching and joining me on this emotional journey of survival, loss, and resilience. This story reminds us to trust our instincts, stay cautious, and always value the safety of home. Life can be unpredictable, but through love, wisdom, and second chances, we find our strength. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay wise, and take care. Once upon a time, in a small African village surrounded by vast fields and ancient trees, there was a girl named Amma. Amma was not like any other child in the village. She was born after 13 whole months, unlike other babies who came after 9. This unusual birth made everyone in the village talk. Some said she was special, others thought it was strange and a bit scary. The night Amma was born, the sky was filled with bright twinkling stars, but this happy night also brought sadness because Amma's mother passed away just after giving birth. So Amma's father, a kind and hardworking farmer, had to take care of her all by himself. He was both mother and father to Amma, and he loved her more than anything in the world. Amma's father would often take her to the farm with him. He'd lay Amma under a big shady tree while he worked in the fields. Amma loved watching the leaves dance in the wind and listening to the birds sing. Sometimes her father would give her a small piece of fruit to nibble on, and Amma would giggle as she watched the ants march in a line nearby. But one day, something really strange happened. Amma, only 6 months old, suddenly started crying very loudly. It was not a normal cry. It was so loud and strange that it made her father run to her, worried. Just as he picked Amma up, the big tree she was lying under fell down with a huge crash, right where she had been. Everyone in the village was shocked. They couldn't believe it. How did Amma know? They whispered. Is she magic? From that day, Amma became known for being different. She would laugh in the middle of the night as if she was playing with invisible friends, and sometimes she'd cry loudly, as if she was scared or upset by something no one else could see. As Amma grew older, she started saying things that would come true. She would tell her father, "It's going to rain today," and even if the sky was clear, it would rain. Her father would sometimes smile and say, "You always surprise me, my girl." But then she started saying things that scared the villagers. Like one time, she said, "I'm sad because tomorrow we will lose someone." And the very next day, one of her friends in the village got very sick and passed away. People in the village started to stay away from Amma. They were scared of her predictions. They whispered, "Is she a witch? Why does she know these things?" Poor Amma felt lonely because she didn't understand why people were afraid of her. She was just a girl who somehow knew things that others didn't. This is how the story of Amma began. A girl born under a starry sky, loved by her father, feared, and wandered about by her village. A girl who was about to discover more about her mysterious gift and how it would change her life and the lives of those around her in the village. Amma grew up as the girl everyone talked about. Her predictions, which she didn't understand herself, made her both special and scary to the people around her. Amma's father always told her, "You are unique, my child," trying to make her feel better. But Amma often felt lonely because the other kids wouldn't play with her, and their parents would quickly call them away whenever she came near. She would watch the other children play from a distance, sometimes drawing in the dirt with a stick, trying to keep herself entertained. One day, Amma made a prediction that really frightened everyone. She said, "I see darkness coming over the chief's house, and it will bring much sadness." The villagers were scared because the chief was like the king of their village, a man everyone respected and loved. They whispered among themselves, "What does Amma's prediction mean? Is something bad going to happen?" Not long after Amma's words, something sad really did happen in the chief's house. The chief's youngest daughter, who was always full of laughter and fun, suddenly fell ill and sadly, she passed away. The village had been filled with the sound of her laughter only days before, and now it was eerily quiet. This made the villagers very upset and afraid. They started saying Amma brings bad luck. Her words are cursed. They didn't want to believe that Amma just somehow knew things before they happened. The villagers went to the chief and said, "We must do something about Amma. She's bringing bad omens to our village." The chief, a kind and wise man, was in a tough place. He knew Amma was just a child, but he also had to calm his people's fears. Amma's father was very worried. He loved his daughter and knew she was not to blame for the things she saw in her visions. He went to the chief and begged, "Please don't punish my daughter for something she can't control. She's not bringing these bad things. She just knows they're going to happen." The chief decided to talk to Amma. He asked her, "Why do you think you see these things before they happen?" Amma, with her innocent eyes, replied, "I don't know, chief. I just see them in my mind like pictures in a dream." She hesitated for a moment and then added, "Sometimes they come when I'm sleeping, and other times they just appear when I'm awake." The chief, seeing her honesty and innocence, felt a deep sadness for her. He told the villagers, "We cannot blame Amma for the things she sees. She is just a child, a special child, and we should not fear her." But the villagers were still scared. They started avoiding Amma and her father. Amma felt very sad and kept to herself, spending most of her time in the fields with her father or under the big baobab tree, where she felt a strange sense of peace. She would often trace her fingers along the rough bark of the baobab, feeling its strength, as if it was sharing its wisdom with her. After this sad incident at the chief's house, the villagers were more afraid of Amma than ever. They whispered, "She's not safe to have around, and her words bring only bad news." Amma felt very sad and alone, but her father was always there, telling her, "You have a gift, Amma. Don't be afraid of it." Her father would sometimes bring her small treats, honey or fruit, to cheer her up, and they would sit together under the stars, talking about happier times. The fear in the village grew so much that one day the villagers went to the chief and said, "We can't live with Amma's predictions anymore. She must leave our village." The chief, who had always been kind to Amma, was in a very hard place. He didn't want to send Amma away, but he also wanted to keep peace in the village. Amma's father pleaded with the chief, "Please don't send my daughter away. She's just a girl, and she means no harm." But the villagers were firm. They said, "If Amma stays, we will always be afraid. We must protect our village." The chief, with a heavy heart, decided that Amma should be sent away from the village. Amma was heartbroken. She cried, "Why do I have to leave? I never wanted my visions to hurt anyone." She looked at her father, tears streaming down her face, and added, "I just want to be like everyone else." Her father held her, trying to be strong, but his eyes were full of tears. "You are special, Amma," he whispered. "One day they will see." On the day Amma was to leave, she said, "I have one last thing to share, a secret that's not mine, but the villages." The villagers were curious. They thought, what secret could Amma know? So they gathered around, even though they were still scared. Amma took them to the chief's house, to a room that was always locked. The chief looked nervous, but Amma said, "The truth is in this room." With a key that she had found in one of her visions, Amma unlocked the door. Inside, they found walls covered with names and events, all the bad things that had happened in the village. And there, in the chief's handwriting, were plans that showed he had caused some of the troubles, hoping to keep the villagers dependent on him, while painting Amma and her father's image badly. In fact, It was revealed that the death of Amma's mother was the chief's plan, as he had wanted to marry her, but she refused and went to marry Amma's father instead. The villagers couldn't believe their eyes. They were shocked. Our chief did this. They asked. The chief had no words. He had been caught. Amma said, "I saw this in a vision. I knew I had to show everyone the truth." The villagers who had been so scared of her now saw her as a hero. They realized Amma's gift was special and that she had used it to save them from the chief's lies. Instead of sending Amma away, the villagers thanked her. They said, "We're sorry, Amma. You're a blessing, not a curse." Amma's father hugged her, proud and relieved. The chief was the one who had to leave the village, and Amma stayed, loved and respected by everyone. From that day, Amma used her gift to help her village. She warned them about bad weather and helped them prepare for good harvests. Sometimes she would sit with the elders and share her visions, and they would listen carefully, grateful for her help. The villagers would say, "Amma is our guardian angel. We're lucky to have her." Amma's story spread to nearby villages, and she became known as the girl who could see the future, a gift that brought her from being feared to being the most loved person in her village. Thank you for joining us in Amma's journey, a tale of resilience, acceptance, and the power of truth. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage and magic to life. Until next time, keep believing in the power of kindness and the beauty of being unique.